Today, I will be giving you the full rundown on how I make object show character assets so you can too. The first thing I like to do before making an object show asset is I want to find a reference picture. That way I can go based off something that can actually help me later on. So for example, I like the design of this snail shell right here. So what I'm going to do is copy this image, and then I will paste it over into Adobe Animate. Just a quick note, this tutorial is mainly only for Adobe Animate, so if you are using a mobile app to animate your character assets, this tutorial may not be for you. What I like to do next is then enlarge the image. That way I can actually move around it and figure out where I want my lines to go. What I mean by detailing the lines is the stroke that is around the character. Let's take the character assets for Fanny and Leafy as an example. If you look at the asset for Fanny, what I mean by a stroke is the outline that is around the image itself. So for example, if I wanted to change this to red, you can tell that is the stroke. I want to go for the body of the fan. Let's change this to yellow. That is the body of the stroke. Same thing can apply to Leafy, where if you take this, change it up, make it red, that is the outline of the character, and that is what we are going to be focusing on first. So if you don't feel like sketching something out, what I like to mainly do most of the time is outline the image that I take. So I'll start off by creating a new layer, and on this layer I will outline the snail shell, that way I have my stroke ready to go. Preferably, I like to use a green because green or yellow are usually two easy colors that can stand out. Because if you use something like black or white, it may be hard to tell where the stroke is when you're outlining the image. So let's get started on that. Now, what I like to do is actually create a lot of key points, because what this does, it leaves me room to move around with the stroke later on. Now, for something like this, you can tell, obviously, the lines are not going around where the lines should be. So that is where the stroke comes into play. What I will do first is actually increase the size just a little bit. That way I can see a little bit better of what I'm doing. So you can see over here, I increased it to 2 instead of 1. I would not increase it to an extent that is too much because you may not be able to see what you're doing. It doesn't have to be 2 or 1, just something comfortable to where you can move around. So you can see with the mouse on the bottom right corner of the cursor that it gives you a curve or it gives you half of a square. So what half the square means is that you're moving an endpoint, and with the cursor of the half, it means that you're curving it. So the goal for this image is I'm going to be curving these a lot. I also recommend when doing this to constantly save, because Adobe will just crash on you sometimes out of nowhere. It's just in a program thing, and I do not want anything bad to happen to you if you lose all your progress. So keep in mind, either turn on autosave or constantly recover, or just do both. Now when I look at this, I don't think it's half bad, but I do think it can be better, because if you look very closely, you can tell that these aren't connected. There is still a point that is not connecting them fully. So what I like to do is go to the point where it shows me the half square, and at eventually a certain point, you see it connects out of just nowhere, and that means it's at its like perfect curve. So then from there, I like to mess with it, and then make sure that it aligns with the line that I had before, but still keeping the curviness that I'm wanting it to be. So I will do this for every point that I think may be necessary. And the thing that helps me to tell when it connects fully is seeing all the little dots going along the line until it gets to a certain point where it's not. So that tells me then I need to fix this part as well so it connects. Now that the stroke is actually done, what I'm going to do is add in the fill. To go back for reference, let's take Fanny for example. The fill is then the inside of the character. So you take the blue and change that to green. You can tell that's the part that I'm changing is the fill. You do the same thing with Leafy's green and change that to a yellowish. You can tell that's the fill. Now to add fill to the image, what I personally like to do is just use the bucket tool. So by pressing K on your laptop, what I first do is take the fill in the corner and eyedrop tool and see what I like best. Let's say this tint of brown. So then I will add in the fill. And then to the other side as well. And then I can see that this part down here is a little bit different color, so I'll eyedrop that and do that tool. So when you're comparing the lines now, you can tell the stroke outline is very much smaller compared to the ones of BFDI assets. So as a reference point, I will take Fanny over to compare it and maybe size it up. And I will double click the stroke and increase the size to my liking. That can be 6, that can be 7, 8, 9, 10, it's whatever you think is best. Now, obviously the green does not go with the brown that I just added. So from there, the way that strokes are done, you can tell is a darker tint compared to the fill. So what I do then is I drop the fill, and before I click away, and change with the B in the SHB section, and I can tell that it's 84. You want to go down in percentages when you're changing the stroke. So I'll go down a decent bit, and from there, it is at a point where I'm like, hey, this looks about right. I will stick with this. Now what about for other sections that may be not brown? So take the bottom half of the shell for the example. What I will do then is select everything by holding Shift, and from there I will do the exact same thing. What happens sometimes, if you add a certain stroke color before another, you will have to change it up a little bit. So for example, I don't want these two lines to be on top over here, on these two lines. So I will double click the stroke that I want to be over top, and I will just decrease that down a percentage. So it's 52, so let's change it to 51. And now it's over. So now when it comes to detailing, what I will do is add certain colors that I think work best. So the reason I gave that line as an example right here was because this side is darker than this line. So I will change the fill and make it just a tint darker than what I would like it to be, because now I think that adds a little bit more depth to it. I could go and increase the detail more by adding lines and textures to it, but for now I just want to keep this very simple. From here I need to think about shading and lighting. So as you can see with Fanny and Leafy, they have their shading, which makes their colors stand out, because if I was to add the same fill, it would be very bland and not noticeable. The way I go about this is actually looking by a reference sheet that was created by the background designer for Teapot. So this right here is the image that a lot of people have used in the past, because it can tell you what you're actually working with. You can think about the object that you're working with and go from there. So with a snail shell, for example, it's definitely going to need some shading. So a simple trick that I like to do that keeps it very simple, and this can be up to you if you want to do this as well, is I like to copy and paste the stroke by double clicking it. So then whether you're on Mac or Windows, Control or Command C, and then Control or Command V. What I like to do is then put it back over, do not click away yet. I will change the stroke outline so it does not connect to the outline of the snail shell. We are going to move it to the left, maybe a little bit down, and go from there and see how I feel about that. And from here is where I decide to add shading. So what this does is then it creates separations with the fill. So I can only select certain parts that are being separated by the stroke. So the fills are only in certain sections. For me, what I look for is seeing where are they connecting and how can I make this work to my favor. This character will actually be on my upcoming show top pick, so if you want to stay in tune for that, make sure to subscribe. So I've selected all the parts that I think will need a little bit of shading. So what I do from here is, based on the color that I have, I go down about 5%. So it's 84, so I go down to 79. And I take away the stroke by double clicking the one that wasn't the original and deleting it. So that then adds a shading to the shell itself. Now, before I take that actually away fully, I need to add it to other parts that may have different fill. For example, I have the top part of the shell that is a different color. So 75, go down 5%, take that to 70. Double click the stroke, take it away, different color. I will take then this other part of the shell that I think needs to be changed, double click that, Control C, Control V, realign it with where it just was. Doesn't have to be perfect, change the stroke color, and then move it along. Now sometimes when it's too small, I cannot see where exactly the fill will be, or the separation. So since it's different, I can change the stroke size for this. So let's change it to 2 as an example. I will take this, bring it down a little bit, and I think this will be a good point for the shading. Now sometimes it may not connect, so you can see it's still selecting all the fill. What I like to do is take the endpoint, remember the half square, and then connect it to another part of the stroke. Do the same thing up here. That way, the fill is separated. Now personally, I think a snail shell can be shiny. So what I will do is go in the opposite direction of the shading itself. Now it's actually the exact opposite with this when it comes to shading it down. For highlighting it, I see it's 84, so instead of going down, I go up. Click the stroke, take it away, and sometimes you make it to a point where you're like, I don't like where it looks in certain places. What I like to do with the highlights is instead just change it back to the fill. Sometimes it's the safer option, because it doesn't look as good as you thought it would. And don't forget, you can mess around with the fill as well. So you can change the direction that you may want it to go. Maybe you think it should be larger, smaller, that is all up to you. And from there, it's up to you if you want to decide to be done or not. Now that your asset is done to the point of where you want it to be, to make sure that you can increase and decrease the size in the image itself without having any problems, make sure to select the layer that it was on. I then go over to Modify and Convert to Symbol. And you may have a function on your keyboard. For me, I have F8, so I can do it immediately. Now to name the symbol, I usually just name it the object that it is. So snail shell as an example. Now, you can either change this type to a movie clip or graphic. Graphics are only used for if the object is moving. As an example, that can be fiery or fanny. Objects like leafy don't move since they don't have any animation. So we'll then click OK, and your object is created. Before I end the tutorial today, the last thing I wanted to show you is assets can have more than one layer. For example, I grabbed the lava lamp because there are actually way more layers than you think there would be. Each one can be composed of something that you think might be valuable. The first layers that I have is the glass, the second layer is the lighting, the third layer is the body for the lava lamp, and the fourth layer is the lava itself. Now, when you stack these all on top of each other, that is what makes a layer. And obviously you don't want to be dragging around a whole set of layers every single time. So what you can do for this is select all the layers by holding Shift on the top layer or the bottom and then going all the way down, right click on it and convert layers to symbol, and it converts it all into one symbol. And that's all I got for today. So if you have any suggestions for what you'd like to see for the next video, make sure to leave a comment down below. I'll see you next time.